Perhaps you could just begin by, introducing yourself and what you're currently up to.
Okay, well, so let me begin by explaining what you can see behind me. So I'm the Alfred Landecker Professor of Values and Public Policy at the Blavatnik School of Government, University of Oxford. And I teach in political philosophy. That's where most of my research has been. Before I moved to Oxford, I was at UCL for a long time. I was a professor of philosophy there and then the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities. And my work began as a sort of traditional political philosopher. Maybe we'll talk about what that means a bit later on, but working on topics of justice and state authority. Then it's 20 years ago now, I started getting involved in questions about ethics and public policy. So I was invited to take part in a review of gambling law in the UK, and they wanted a philosopher to think about the ethics of gambling and the ethics of the regulation of gambling, more importantly. So I got into that, and I got one invitation after another for about 15 years. So for a long time, I was constantly sitting on committees looking at public events, issues of public morality. What I have done in terms of my research, one strand of research has been looking at the intersection between political philosophy and these matters of public policy. And so I have a book, Ethics and Public Policy, that's just been published in the second edition. I've also worked on issues around justice and disadvantage, looked at the capability approach, for example, which I think we might talk about a bit later on. I've also done quite a bit of work on two topics that have suddenly come back into fashion. I was working on these topics and really stopped for a while. These were the ethics of risk and issues around resource distribution, particularly in medical resource distribution. So I've worked on thinking about how we should price drugs, how should we incentivize the development of drugs in the health service. So I did quite a bit of work around the human right to health, around healthcare allocation, the social determinants of health, and risk. And I'd put that to one side for a while, and I've been working on regulation, and also with my new research project on minority rights, because my chair is set up in memory of a man who was murdered in the Holocaust, and the chair is funded around the types of issues of rising intolerance and destruction of minority rights. So that's another strand. So if we go back just the last 2 or 3 years, I was working on regulation. Then I switched to starting thinking about fascism and the rise of fascism and the parallels we see now. Then suddenly I got all these phone calls and emails saying, can you help us with this paper on COVID and resource allocation, or COVID and risk? And so I think I'm now on 3 different working groups producing papers on COVID related topics. And I've also got another 2 papers with co-authors. So suddenly I've gone back to the things I was doing 5 or 10 years ago because of the current situation.
Oh, well, sounds like a busy time. I guess if you're on lockdown, there's less distractions. So what does not everyone, I know this was the case for me, not everyone would actually know what a political philosopher does, because we hear of political science, and we hear of, we all live in countries governed by governments, but it's not immediately obvious what a political philosopher does, and what the relationship might be to other areas of philosophy and moral philosophy. So I'm curious, perhaps if you could just speak briefly about the role of a political philosopher in society, and perhaps how common it is for political philosophers to engage in matters of policy and ethics, like you're doing at the moment.
So there are so many ways of trying to answer this question, and so I'll give you a couple of the things I think about that are quite related. So I teach now in the School of Government, and a lot of our students are mature students, so age 25 to 35, often from the developing world, who haven't studied humanities before. So they might have had a background in business, even engineering, medicine. They come to do a Master of Public Policy. They have this course in political philosophy, and they are a bit daunted because they don't really know what it's going to be. And we start talking to them, and they get engaged very quickly. And one of them, an Indian student, said to me, you know, this is just like the arguments I had with my father when I was 15 years old. And the thought was, if you're sitting around the dinner table with another generation, and they might have at that point more conservative views than you, and they think unemployment benefits should be cut because of all these lazy people, and you want to say, well, they're not lazy, they can't get a job, maybe they're depressed and can't work, maybe there are other reasons. Before you call them lazy, maybe you should look and think about their lives and how it would look from your point of view. And so quite a lot of what we do in political philosophy is to take the discussions people are having among themselves. You hear on the radio, you hear in the pub, if you can still go to the pub where you are. We try to just think about these issues in a much more structured and systematic way, and try to understand the underlying concepts and values, how they relate to each other. So the second answer to the question, that was the first answer to the question, political philosophy is what we're already doing anyway, but we do it in a much more systematic and structured fashion. The second answer comes from the way the course I teach on now was set up. It was set up by other people. And they set it up around 4 questions, which we still follow. So the first question is, what is the aim of government? So the thought is, what should governments do? We elect these governments. What do we want them to do? And it's going to be something like further the common good. They should act in the public interest. But what does that actually mean? So what do we want our governments to be doing? And how can we tell whether they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing? So that's the first question. What's the aim of government? Second question we have is, what are the limits of government? So what should government not do? So should government be able to intrude in your private life? Should government be able to tell you who you can marry and who you can't marry? Or in some countries, it can tell you you can't call your children certain names, or that you can't wear certain things in public, or you must wear certain things in public. So are we comfortable with the limits of government? So in other words, this is a question about rights and disobedience and justified protest, which of course is a major, major topic at the moment. Just like every other moment, actually, there's always reasons to be protesting against your government. There are always people with placards somewhere. So some people think either the government is doing the wrong thing, or in the sense it should be doing something else, or they think the government just shouldn't be intruding in this area. And of course, we have people telling us the government's wrong to enforce mask wearing, or the government's wrong to keep us in our homes at the moment. So those are questions about the limits of government. Then the third question, which is the one I suppose I was more interested in to start with, is the question of who gets what. So that in any society, there's a distribution of resources. Should we just let the market distribute resources? Should we correct the markets? What does it mean to correct the market? Should we move more in the direction of equality? Have we gone too far in the direction of equality? So of the good things in society, wealth and income, opportunity, how should they be distributed? Then the final question, it could be the first question really, is who says? So decisions have to be made, who should make them? And it's really fascinating for me, having moved from one university to another. So I used to teach at UCL, University College London, and we had a lot of overseas students there, but they were from a limited range of countries. And we could pretty much assume in the classroom that everyone agrees with us that democracy is the only way. And so if a society is not democratic, then there's something wrong with it. And then where I am now, we have students from 50 different countries most year in the classroom. So we have obviously students from China, students from Singapore, students from some African countries with a one-party democracy really. We have students who have countries that look a bit less democratic or don't even pretend to be democratic. And it feels rather arrogant to us to stand up at the front and say, well, we know democracy is the only system. And so if you're living in a country that's not a democracy, you are wrong. And so we have these questions about how, so really the question of who decides is, how should our government be appointed? Should it be through democratic election, or are there other ways that are legitimate? And so this is one of the areas we discuss on the course? Are there legitimate routes? And is democracy as good as we used to think it was? So in surveys now around the world, particularly younger people are not so impressed with democratic systems as they once were, including people living in democratic systems, of course.
The question of democracy is an interesting one. It's a term that's bandied around every day in, amongst friends and in discussions with relatives and, on television and all that. But I think we all have an intuitive understanding of what it is, but it also varies quite considerably depending on which country you're speaking, which country you're referring to. So what is the unifying thread of democracy? Is it the ability for each person in society, perhaps above a certain age, they have the ability to influence the political process? If you were to reduce it down to something, would that be what democracy is?
So you're right to raise this as a question, and whenever anyone asks me for a definition of anything, I begin to panic.
Yeah, because it's really difficult. Because this is the nature of I guess, 50% of philosophy, at least from what I've seen.
Yeah, so I'm with Nietzsche on this, and so Nietzsche said that any concept that has a history doesn't have a definition, because it's used by different people at different times and in different ways. And the idea that there's a single real essence is very dogmatic. So I could give you a definition of democracy, but maybe it doesn't fit your idea of democracy. And who's to say I'm right and you're wrong? But I think that that's not to say things are not analyzable. So if we think about what the essence of democracy seems to be, the way it's used now, I think we tend to think of it as having two or maybe three main aspects to it. So first of all, you have majority voting. So there's no doubt about that for democracy. It involves a system by which people cast their votes, and there's some way in which you announce a winner from the process as according to the rules. So it involves voting. Secondly, certainly in modern democracies, it involves competition between parties. So you have systems where you vote, but there's only one party you can vote for effectively. And we're pretty sure that's not a democracy. Thirdly, and this is maybe more controversial, but I think very important, that democracies involve protection of minority rights. So democracy is not just about voting, but about protecting vulnerable people. Now, you might say that's not democracy, that's liberalism or liberal democracy. I certainly think in modern democracy, the protection of vulnerable groups is really critically important. So here, I think this is one of the crises we're in at the moment, because we have popular leaders, very often people who were not career politicians, so they've come into politics from the outside. I'm thinking of one country in particular here, and they are not really very respectful of the ordinary ideas of politics. They think they've been elected to run the country. They have the will of the people as the wind in their sails. So they have been elected to do the will of the people. The will of the people turns out to be whatever they want, but that's the will of the people because they've been elected. And they think that if a judge or an academic or a newspaper stands in their way by trying to point out they're overturning old democratic traditions or violating the separation of powers or persecuting minorities, those people are accused of standing in the way of the will of the people and are therefore enemies of the people. So protectors of minority rights suddenly turn into enemies of the people because of the emphasis on majority rule rather than the other half of democracy or another third of democracy that I see, the protection of individuals.
Yeah, it's quite disconcerting to see, in all honesty. We're most likely referring to the United States and, what is it, the 22nd of September. And like, I don't know if many of us would have expected that things would deteriorate so quickly over there. And, just to have Trump at the helm, spouting, what he spouts and really dividing people it's quite a worry. I want to just shift to some of the things that you brought up earlier about the role of government and political philosophy in general. A lot of its political philosophy seems to be focused on, and this is just from my limited exposure to it, but on the roles and the responsibilities of the state and what is just. But in a world where we have over 100 states, and each of them are interconnected, and we have intergovernmental organizations like the United Nations, and the fact that we all share one planet and that we are inextricably connected to the Earth and its natural systems. What's the conversation like, or what is discussed by political philosophers where these issues are concerned? Because I'm Australian. I've lived in Australia for a decent chunk of my life, but I've also lived in other countries, and I'm exposed and deeply influenced by the internet and the fact that I'm connected to all these other countries, and many of the opportunities that I am afforded in life, and just the technologies and the entertainment and the culture that I have access to is not a consequence of my own country, but that of many others and and their constituents. So it's the line of the state. It's a nice box to work within, but we're at this time now where those borders are becoming more permeable. And I'm curious to hear about what's being spoken about, or what's the I'm not too sure, but it's just very interesting, because we have all these global challenges which we're faced with, and we have these sovereign nation states who are, self-determined, and they have their sovereign rights. But it seems like a bit of a problem, given the degree of risk, the risk that we are faced with, existential risks. So I don't know what you could just pick up wherever you want from there, because it wasn't really a question, but what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, thank you. Yes. So as you were talking, you reminded me of a book I reviewed 20 years ago, longer than that. And there was an essay by David Held in it. And he said that the nation state is obsolete because it's too big for some purposes and too small for others. That is, if you think about a city, say, it's very important to have city level governance. Very important to have, he wasn't talking about climate change, but he was talking about ecological degradation. We need to deal with that on a global level. Lots of things about security we need to do on a more global level. And so, he was arguing even 20 years ago that the state is this sort of uncomfortable thing in the middle, the nation state's a comfortable thing in the middle, which doesn't really serve the purposes it used to serve. So I think that can be exaggerated. There's still a good role for the nation states that I don't think we can move to global governance. I think that would be a very scary prospect to have the idea that there would be one government for everything. And I don't think it's possible, although there are very big countries. So if you think about China, China is a quarter of the population of the earth, and there's one government for China. So if you get it right, you can maybe do it fairly effectively on a very, very large scale. But I think if you think about where is the conversation now, there are lots of different conversations. And as I'm sure discussion in philosophy can get very meta and methodological. So a lot of the discussion is the question of what is the discussion we should be having right now. Because it's fascinating. Even some of the terminology is really interesting. So when I mentioned I was at UCL, and one of the spiritual founder of UCL is Jeremy Bentham. And Jeremy Bentham invented the word international.
Is his body, but his body's at UCL, right? Like, and when I
Yes,
say
his
act,
bone.
it's like stuffed, or he's sorry for the diversion, but it's just
Yeah,
like an interesting fact.
yeah. I'm sure you can find a picture. It's called an auto icon. It's his bones apparently that have been somehow embalmed, and he's in a case in UCL. In fact, they just moved it to the new student centre. I think a great controversy because it was in a wooden box, and I think now it's in a perspex case that you can see all the way around.
I wonder what the utilitarian argument is for
Yeah,
that.
it's very funny. I can't. And he has various things about. We shouldn't pay attention to the dry old bones of the past. But anyway, his dry old bones are there at UCL. But
yeah, I wasn't sure, but sorry for that.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's, so Bentham coined the word international, and for a while, we were using that quite a lot at UCL. And then someone pointed out to me, well, international and global, we often use them as synonyms, but they're not the same, because international is about relations between nations rather than relations between people. And we have departments of politics. Even at Oxford, we've got the Department of Politics and International Relations. So that's treating the world as a system of nations, and we need to understand the relations between those nations. But there's another view that says, well, we should talk about global justice, say, rather than international justice, because what matters are the people that live in the nations, not the nations themselves. And so to think globally is to try and think of a single population of everyone rather than a community of nations. But within political philosophy, some of the topics that have been discussed and have always been discussed concern international relations, such as war, conditions under which one country could declare war on another. And so there's a just war tradition, and people are still obviously talking about this because it's not a topic that's gone away or is ever likely to go away. But the trendy topic, I guess, 15 years ago, and that's not to say it's gone away, but it really became very prominent then, was the topic of global justice and the question of what is it that wealthy countries owe to poor countries, and how should we conceptualize those duties. Actually, it goes back quite a bit further. There's a very famous paper by Peter Singer in the 70s, Famine, Affluence and Morality, where Singer argues that just as you should help the child drowning in the pond, you should send your money across the world to help the child starving. And so there's this idea that, that we have humanitarian aid because other people are starving. And of course, it's hard to disagree that we have some humanitarian duties. But what are those duties? Are they duties of charity? Are they duties of justice? Are they duties of reparation? So here we get into questions about empire and colonial injustice and historic injustice, and whether, because if you're brought up in a wealthy country, every Christmas you're shown advertisements about people starving in other countries, and that we have to send them some money to keep them alive. I can remember a Nigerian academic who was working in Namibia coming into my office a long time ago and saying, you look at these things, and people in the West think of Africa as a continent full of starving people. And that's our image of Africa. It's a continent where everyone's starving. I said, well, if that's true, how did it get to survive this long? I mean, if it's the natural state of Africa to be starving, and it only stays alive because of Bob Geldof and Live Aid, then it would have been dead long ago, right? And he says, this is such a terrible misrepresentation. Of course, people do starve in Africa very sadly, but it's not the natural state of affairs. And Africa is very advanced in the cities and so on, lots of new technological developments. Banking, Africa has a banking system. Who would know if you just saw the documentaries?
And they've leapfrogged us as well, not only with the adoption of certain technologies. In Kenya, I think they were transferring payments between each other with phones a long time before. I mean, a lot of us in Australia probably aren't doing it. Maybe my grandma, or the older generations. Perhaps now they are, but I think this is at least 10 years. This has been around for 10 years, so they've just completely leapfrogged. And I know there's a thriving startup ecosystem, from what I understand, in Nigeria and in Ethiopia, but I haven't had the exposure there. But yeah, it's not this this desolate, arid, famine-ridden land that we've been shown on these advertisements. But
yeah. So this is one conversation now, which is how do we conceptualize our relations between the wealthy countries and developing countries? What we have sort of grown up with is the idea that somehow the wealthy countries are wealthy because of our character and thrift and hard work and greater intelligence or something, and other countries are poor because somehow they're just naturally poor, and so out of the goodness of our hearts we ought to share some of our excess wealth with these poor unfortunates. So it's sort of like a medieval view of Christian charity, really. And what it has in common with that medieval view is it doesn't interrogate the history that put people in those different positions. And so, within, I suppose, the domestic framework, you have the Marxist tradition, which tries to expose exploitation and class struggle. Then you have the same thing in a global dimension, think about colonialism, imperialism, and historical injustice and the legacy of injustice. And so I think we're still working out how to think about this, because there's a type of dilemma, which is on the one hand, it seems insulting to say to the developing world, you need our charity. On the other hand, there do seem to be some rights that have been violated, and that there seems to be a legitimate claim for something in response to those rights violations. So is it a massive transfer of resources? So we're learning more and more. I mean, so in the UK, we've had our head in the sand for so long, and I think if you think about slavery, the slave trade in the UK, most people, I think, only know that Wilberforce abolished the slave trade or something. This is what they will say. England is responsible for abolishing the slave trade. They weren't told we were responsible for starting it. They're only told we were responsible for ending it.
If you put out the fire that you started, it does make you benevolent and wonderful.
and it's not just a fire, because it was a raiding exercise. And the wealth of this nation is built on cotton, on sugar, on...
There's this book called The Divide by Jason, I want to say Hinkle, but I can't remember. And he goes, it's like a deep exploration of the divide between, I think it's the global South, the global North, and the global South. I don't know if I like that distinction, but basically, the West and the rest. And he explores how the riches of Europe and the UK was not only a lot of it was not just due to the raping of South America and Africa, but also the I think it was the calories that the Brits and the Europeans could get from the trade and the extraction of resources and like the enslaving of people enabled the Industrial Revolution, because everyone needs a certain amount of land for or a certain amount of calories to do work. Energy is like the fundamental unit in a way of life in any civilization or organism. So the ability to outsource the production of calories freed up the hands of those in Europe to move towards more industrial activities, which then ratcheted up, like it empowered these countries to produce far more valuable goods and skyrocket ahead. Like economies, it's like because they were that far ahead, they had increasing returns to scale and all that sort of stuff. And I just thought that's a very interesting. I hadn't heard of that before, and this idea of whether or not we are like this discussion of charity and redistribution and global wealth redistribution is, a big question of it, at least from my perspective, is are we entitled to keep, are we responsible for generating all of our wealth? Are we solely responsible? And if the answer is no, then the question is, okay, well, how responsible are we? And this perspective makes me see, among many others, that we are far less responsible than many of us might like to think. And the implications for that are, well, do we redistribute wealth globally? And if that's the case, then how do we do it? And blah 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 blah. But I just thought that was it was quite eye-opening.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I hadn't heard that. What it reminds me of is a book I once read a review about concerning the potato, which is not indigenous to Europe.
My favorite vegetable, by the way.
Yeah,
Delicious.
yeah. Well,
fried potatoes.
And supposedly the potato transformed nutrition because you can get much more nutrition out of potato given what you need to cultivate it. So before that, in Europe, we were using wheats and grasses, which give you far less nutrition than the potato does. So even simple things like that. But this point about luck, what are we responsible for? And so a lot depends on whether you take we individually or collectively. If you think of we Australians or we Brits, what are we responsible for? And we can have an argument that it was a combination of pillage and maybe grit and determination. But if you take us now as individuals, we're not responsible for anything. We were born into a system whereby we could convert the talents we had into a comfortable life. But if you've been born to a different system, probably none of us would have been able to convert those talents into very much. So I think we tend to forget all the background that allows some people with talents to pursue a certain type of life. But so all of this goes into these issues at the moment. But I just to continue the thought, I'll stop. That within the discussion of distributive justice, contemporary distributive justice, and global justice, which is what we're talking about, there's one argument we've been talking about now, which is very important, which is the historical legacy. And we've talked about the way in which the wealthy countries just use their empires as resources, really, to pillage the. You had what was it from the Congo? Someone noticed that when the Congo was a Belgian possession, in fact, the personal possession of King Leopold, in one direction there was mahogany and rubber in the boats, and in the other direction were guns and shackles. Okay, so there was an Irish shipping clerk looking at this, saying, well, this doesn't look like fair trade to me. This doesn't look like a trading relation between two countries, because you have valuable commodities going in one direction and instruments of torture and oppression going in the other direction. Okay, so you have that historical injustice, and then this raises quite interesting philosophical questions, because all of the people who are directly involved in those injustices are dead now. And so do we, as their successors, well, my family, okay, it's not that uncommon in the UK. I'm from an immigrant family. None of my family were in the UK when these things were being done. Does that mean I personally don't have any liability for it? So you can get into all these tough, and Australia, I suppose, is even more so, that it's a nation of immigrants. So there are those questions of historical injustice. I think there are answers to them. But there's another question about continuing injustice through trade laws, for example, and trade patterns, unfair trading practices. And so it's believed by many people that the international trade laws are rigged in favor of the rich countries. And so it's not just a historical injustice, it's ongoing injustice now. And so there are injustices that need to be corrected.
This is mentioned in that book, I'm sure. As well. I think he mentions that a number of African countries that were once French colonies, they have to buy certain resources or from France rather than from other countries. Their trading partners are limited by, you know, some issues of historical circumstance, nothing more.
Yeah. I mean, and this happens in most peculiar ways. So I was in Namibia a while ago. We had a conference, and the deputy minister from the finance ministry was there. And he, in his talk, it became apparent that Namibia has a special relationship with China, and that China has some sort of preferential trading arrangement with Namibia, because Namibia only gained its independence in the last few decades, and the revolutionary fighting force was SWAPO, a Southwest Africa something people's organization. So they were like the ANC in South Africa. And all the Western countries supported the regime, not the resistance fighters. So the resistance was only supported by China and the Soviet Union. And of course, the Soviet Union isn't there anymore. So all of these countries in South Africa who gained independence, most of them, what was the group of so-called terrorists are now the ruling party, like the ANC and SWAPO, the political parties. They were funded by China to help gain independence, and they still regard themselves as bound by this special relationship to China. So you have these strange connections where countries find it harder to stand on their own 2 feet because of historical legacy. And you know, the key French example that you comes to mind is Haiti, which was a French colony until the slave revolt. And incredibly, I don't know if it's still going on, but Haiti agreed to pay reparations to France. And so, and this was equivalent of billions of
Wait, so Haiti is paying reparations to France?
Yeah, Haiti is paying reparations to France because the slaves they all freed themselves. And so the French slave owners lost their property. And so Haiti is still paying compensation, I believe.
Still?
Or, well, until very recently. I should have looked this up.
Yeah.
Until recently. Haiti was paying compensation to France for appropriating the slaves, i.e. freeing themselves, if you can believe that.
That's disgraceful.
So,
that, even if it's happened, even up until the most, when would it have been, like a century? If it was going on last century, it should have been stopped. Any self-respecting Frenchman would probably say the same thing, I'm sure. I mean, look at the French population. There's a huge population of Africans there. That's just, well, you Africans, you know, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, terrible.
So once you start digging, you find all sorts of things, and a lot of these things. So you don't have to be a radical to think that a lot of these things are wrong. You just have to know about them, and it's not part of our education to know about the terrible things your country's done. You only learn about the good things. So every country comes away thinking we're the good guys. Even in, it's extraordinary. I was visiting Germany, which is where my father was from, and his parents died in the Holocaust. But I was visiting someone who now lives in the house that they used to live in Frankfurt. And she told me she was educated in Germany in the late 40s and 50s. She was at school, and she never heard about the Second World War at school. So in Germany, history ended when she was young at the First World War, and they were told that it was all Britain's fault, that somehow we had caused the First World War, and they learnt nothing about the rise of Hitler or the Second World War. And this was in the 1950s in Germany. And she told me that she didn't know anything about it until she had an Israeli boyfriend, and she met the boyfriend's parents when she was about 17. And the father said, "I will never know how your people did this to our people." And she said, "What are you talking about?" So this was
What a
Germany
dinner
in the
conversation that would have been. What a pairing
Yeah.
those two back then as well.
Yeah, so that was Germany in the 1950s. So things have moved on. Of course, Germany have done more than anyone to try to acknowledge and repair the harms that have been done. But this is so much of global injustice doesn't need deep philosophical thinking to understand it's unjust. But we do need philosophical thinking to try to work out how to respond to it, not just philosophical thinking. So literature is very important, history is very important, but do we need to make amends, financial amends? What form could that take? What about an apology?
To pay for the sins of our fathers, that's the
yeah.
Something that I've been thinking about is that the good thing is there's a very strong argument, not from the perspective, there's a very strong argument for global wealth redistribution, and it's not about paying reparations, but it's that, a tremendous amount of people in the world just lack access to basic necessities. And, I think even close to 1 billion people don't have access to energy, like, electricity. And that by redistributing wealth, we can grant these people, the billions who are, they don't have the same advantages that you and I have right now. If we were to grant them, if we were to redistribute wealth and deliver more opportunities to them, or to ensure that they have a better material quality of life, the great thing is that in the long run, the fact that human beings are the greatest creative problem solvers we know of in existence, and that one person can change the course of humanity forever, the chances are that these people across the world will do something that's sufficiently productive that will, benefit everyone. The classic is, how many Einsteins are there, in a town or in a village without running water, or, access to the internet, maybe not the internet, but a physics book or whatever. So there's many of these people out there who just lack this basic, who lack basic needs. And what I thought was staggering, because I'm very interested in the internet and how it fits into all of this. And there's a statistic that, we always hear that, close to 50% of the population has access, of the global population has access to the internet. And we're like, oh, that's pretty good. 50%, that's, we're on our way. But what they fail to mention is that 50%, that statistic, to be counted in that statistic, you need to have had access to the internet once within 3 months. So every 3 months, which is, you wouldn't say you have access to running water if you get access to a tap once every 3 months. So the reality is probably far worse. And when you consider the power, the potential of the internet for not just, like, it increases the landscape of opportunity more than anything else we know of. And people can learn how to read. It's the base of the branch in a way for all the freedoms that you can achieve. If you get access to something like that, or, shelter, water, all those sorts of things, it could result in, a tremendous amount of benefits. So I think the framing of this question of wealth redistribution, rather than it being paying for the sins of our fathers and, it's retribution, it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's, reparations. Rather than viewing it from that perspective, there's like this, what I'd say more of a positive, you could say egoistic or selfish perspective, that, like, distributing wealth globally can actually benefit myself and people in my own country, which I think is just a wonderful, it's wonderful that that's the case.
My slight variation on that is, it would be wonderful if it were the case, right? So
if we were doing that, or
so if we could be sure that
yes,
because I think so I take a slightly unconventional view, I think, on this, because there's a lot of writing in global justice which points out, the top so many percent, or the top 10 billionaires. If the top 10 billionaires gave away half their money, we would solve global poverty or something. So, Oxfam puts out figures like this. Philosophers often start their papers like this, with these figures. And I just want to say, well, slow down a bit, because what are we going to do with that money? What's going to happen to it? Huge amounts of money have been put into development, and we've got much less to show for it than we think we ought to have. Dambisa Moyo, economist from Zambia, wrote a book called Dead Aid, and she said $3 trillion of aid has been put into Africa. And what has it created? Well, it's created a corrupt class of rentiers who've taken this money and left their countries in an enormous amount of debt. Now, of course, a lot of that is loans and conditional loans rather than aid. But I think the point is that, or the point I want to make is that there are two problems. One is getting the money, and the other is knowing what to do when you've got the money. And most people, political philosophers, will be focused on these questions of the distribution of money, because there are wealthy countries and poor countries, and it's obvious that equality requires distribution, and there are other good reasons for distribution. But we still need to know what are we going to do when we've got the money. And you go through Africa, you see lots of wells that were dug 5 years ago and not maintained and are now abandoned. You see brand new Toyota Land Cruisers abandoned by the side of the road because the oil filter is clogged and no one taught anyone how to clean the oil filter. So it's not a matter of transferring resources. It's a matter of real change, real social change, which can't be done just by money. I mean, one of the topics I've worked on a bit in the last few years is poverty. And I was asked to start on this work by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation in the UK. And the Rowntree Foundation was founded by a member of the Rowntree family, Benjamin Sibbam Rowntree, who was a philanthropist and social researcher. And he was writing about poverty in around about 1900, so in York, in the north of England. And he had this incredible project where he had his inspectors just go around house by house and inspecting the poor people of York. I mean, I don't know that you could do this now. How many people live there? What do they do? So you have these remarkable reports that say, one room house, wife slovenly, husband drunk, 4 children, shared toilet with 10 others, overflowing, 1 water pipe for 20 people. And you just get these descriptions. And of course, someone's working, someone's respectable. There's a hint here and there that someone might be a prostitute, but on the whole, these are just very poor people who are trying to get by and struggling to get by. And the description is like the shanty towns you see in developing countries. That was 1900. About 1930, 1940, he did the same sort of thing. And in those 3 or 4 decades, which were not particularly celebrated as decades of great economic growth, because there was a war and the Depression and the Great Strike, but between 1900 and 1930 or 1940, suddenly the poor aren't living like that anymore. So the poor have got power, they've got lighting in their houses. It's not just gas lights or candles. They're not really starving. In 1900, there was a story of one of these, not that book, but another book about a woman who was too ashamed to do her shopping in the daylight hours because she only had slippers. So she'd wait till dark. She didn't have any outdoor shoes, so she'd wait till dark to go out and do her shopping, right? And other stories where you couldn't have everyone out of the house at the same time in the winter because they don't have enough coats. So that was a sort of 1900 England, right? By 1930s, 1940s, okay, that was still going on, but it was very, very rare. So something had happened that had brought people out of poverty. And this is what sort of gives me hope, really, because yes, to some degree it was government policies. To some degree, the government was more enlightened. It was paying attention. But it wasn't just coming along and splashing some money. It didn't just say, here's money from rich people, we're going to give it to poor people, or that we're going to give it to local governments. It needed a properly thought through plan. And so I'm very naive here, but I think if people come up with the plans that work, they will get funded, because there's a lot of money out there looking to do good. But what happens is that the plans are too optimistic, they're not proven, they fail, they're not sustainable, they don't have local buy-in. Some of the money is filtered off through corruption. So lots of money comes in, and there's relatively little to show for it.
Yeah. There's I'd love to know how effective, like the money spent on these sorts of things. I mean, it'd be hard to, next to impossible, because we're talking about either, like I'm thinking about aid in particular, but also just general social spending in governments and in societies. So I'm just curious, do you know, this is maybe not so much on the political philosophy front, but what sorts of investments like this actually result in increases in well-being? Or maybe well-being, or quality of life. I don't know how we'd measure this, but
yeah. So it's really tough. I mean, and we go through policy cycles, because you see money going into an area, and it's wasted, or there's something is done, it falls into disrepair, or there's no local buy-in to begin with. So people go in with a big idea, do something.
Sorry, when you say local buy-in, do you mean local as buy-in from the people, or the
yeah?
Okay, so the people who
the people who it's intended to benefit. I mean, so here's a silly example. It wasn't a lot of money, but I was at a conference, and an Ethiopian scholar was going through the Millennium Development Goals. So you can tell how old this is, right? So the Millennium Development Goals, and he was going through the slides very quickly, and everything was a bit dismal, that nothing was going very well. But then one of the slides was for indoor toilets or indoor latrines. And he went very quickly through it. It looked a great success. Like, there was a very high uptake of indoor latrines. And he went over the slide, and we all said, hang on, come back. Isn't that a great success story? And he said, well, the numbers are good, but we're talking about people who are living basically in huts here. So what is an indoor latrine, right? So an indoor latrine is a hole you've dug in your own hut. And you get money from the government to dig a hole in your own hut, but you're not going to use it.
It's in your hut. It's a hole, an exposed hole without the, oh goodness.
Yeah. So people still go out in the bushes, and if you're living in rural Ethiopia, it's not a problem. It's only if you're in Delhi that's this is a big serious problem. Now that's an exaggeration, but you can see that this whole system was set up with false incentives. So money went in, and it supposedly had the effect, but it made no difference. In fact, it probably made people's life a bit worse, because now they had this hole in their hut in the ground. Or maybe they filled it all in again. But anyway, so you have stupid schemes like that, and that didn't have local buy-in, but it did distribute a bit of money. So I think what tends to happen is you have these schemes that they're not sustainable, they don't have local buy-in. So the next lot come along and say, look, okay, if we're going to do this, we need to have consultation with local people. We have to show it's sustainable. This sounds fantastic. And then it gets operationalized. And what it means now is that for every project you do, you have to have 6 meetings and the paperwork. You have to fill in lots of forms about how this is all going to be sustainable. And so it turns into a bureaucratic nightmare. And so you have this, and people say, what idiot put these ridiculous constraints on it? Let's make it lean and agile and flexible. And so you take all of this off and you go back to where you were. So this is known as policy cycles. So I'm exaggerating. This is a caricature. But you get this sort of thing that everything is very easy to criticize, but it's very, very hard to do better than what you've just criticized. In terms of what has done well, so there are some things I know who've done extremely well experimentally, but they're much harder to roll out. So there's one great project that was done in Bangladesh and Nepal and in part of northern India. And this was about child health. So the problem is, how do you improve child health in low resource settings? And you could try to build a hospital, you could fly in experts from the city, you could try to have education sessions and so on. But the people who are doing this just decide to try a number of different things. And what they found is that the way to improve child health is by empowering women, by which they mean getting women together to share their experiences, getting the best woman in the village to teach, pay the best reader in the village to teach the other women to read. So now they can read about hygiene and nutrition, they can share their stories. And you don't need healthcare resources to get this benefit. Of course, you need healthcare resources for other things. But if you're just trying to look at the most effective way of turning money into health outcomes, the thing to do is to get local women's groups to form, give them the resources they need in order to educate each other and learn from each other.
That's the case for most, like a lot of interventions just come down to, or effective interventions come down to empowering women. Like empowering women is one of the best, like from memory, seems to be one of the best things we can do just to improve outcomes for people in general, or in the disadvantaged countries in particular.
Yeah. And so then there's the question, what does that even mean? And so it's giving safe places to meet, giving a type of permission to do it, so approval, because your husbands will be suspicious about what their wives are doing. I think they're plotting against them or having an affair or something. So you need to set up sort of safe and understood ways in which this can happen. But yeah, it's true. I saw another project about building public toilets in, I think it was in Bangladesh, I might be wrong. But there were two projects, one in which the government had just paid a construction company to build them. And they built them very cheaply, and they were falling apart within a year because they also had the contracts for maintenance and rebuilding. And the other project was just to give the money to the local women who taught themselves how to do it and built to a very high standard, and were so proud of it, they stopped it being vandalized and so on. So, these are small scale things, but you can see there is hope in this way. But it needs genuine, it's a chicken and egg thing, because it needs to be sparked from ground roots. And how, it's like a paradox, how from the outside can you spark things from the ground roots? Once things are started, they can be supported. But if they're not started from the inside, then it's much harder for them to take root.
Yeah. A lot of what we've been discussing relates to people's capacities or people's capabilities. Like what can people do and what can people be in the world? How can they act in the world in such a way that may be beneficial to them? And I know that you've done some work in this approach, which is called the capability. Is capabilities or capability? I always get confused. Anyway, this approach to, I guess, questions of justice. So could you talk to me about the capability approach just generally, and then we'll go on from there?
Very good. So the confusion you have is exactly the right confusion to have between the capability approach and the capabilities approach, because to my mind, there are actually two different theories here. One is the capability theory, and the other is the capabilities theory.
They need different names. So I'm just going to say that right now. Confuse a whole generation of scholars.
Yeah. Okay, so let me start by saying how it occurs, and really the economist who went on to win the Nobel Prize and is still writing and working now.
Sorry, I think you just froze there. Could you just repeat that?
Yeah. So the capability approach is the philosopher and economist Amartya Sen, who was born in India. He's worked in the UK and the US as well. and went on to win the Nobel Prize for economics. And he really is the founder of the capability approach. And to explain explain the motivation, really, it's best really to contrast it with two other approaches to thinking about well-being. And the question is, or one question is, if the government wants to take account of the well-being of its people, what should it measure? So one thing it could do is measure income or wealth, so money, in other words, or resources more broadly. And we do this a lot. So we measure how people are doing in terms of how much they own or how much they have. But Sen thinks this is unsatisfactory because different people have different needs and they convert resources into well-being at different rates. So if you are a very large person who needs a lot of food, then you need more money in order to get the same level of nutrition as other people. So in the developed world, that may not seem like much of a example, but in the developing world, it might be quite important that some people have very different nutritional needs. More importantly, if you're disabled, you might need more resources just to live an ordinary life. So people convert resources into well-being at different rates. And so you say, well, okay, that's fine. Let's just look at let's look at a subjective measure like happiness or preference satisfaction. There are a number of problems. One obvious one is, well, how do you actually measure that? It's not easy to measure how happy people are. Sen is more famous really for a different argument, which is the argument about adaptive preferences, which is the idea that people can express to be perfectly content with their life when they shouldn't be. So this is a problem of the happy slave, or the person, and it seems maybe a bit of a fussy example, but if you look at women in societies which are very oppressive, very often women will report they're perfectly happy with their role to be subservient to their husbands and basically a servant to their husbands and children. And they say they wouldn't want any change. And this gives us a dilemma, because on the one hand, you want to respect people's preferences. On the other hand, you want to say, well, do you really have that preference? Would you have that preference if you knew other alternatives? Isn't that just a way of reconciling yourself to your situation so you're not depressed about it? So this is the thought about adaptive preferences, that people get used to living in their prisons, oppressive circumstances, because the psychological cost of rebellion is just too high. So Sen thinks, and many other people have thought, we can't take preferences for granted either. So you have these two main theories, one resource-based, one preference-based, and there are problems with both of them. So Sen says, well, instead of thinking how much people have or how happy they are, let's think about what people can do with what they have. So you can have two people with the same resources, but if one has higher needs, they'll have lower capabilities. So the same resources can yield different capabilities for different people. And so his view is that we ought to be paying attention to what people can do and be, rather than what they have or how happy or unhappy they are. And this is really the main notion of the general capability approach.
What does to be here mean?
To be, well, so to do is quite easy to understand. So this is why you asked me about to be. To be could be to be a parent. So some people, for example, don't have the resources that will allow them to be successful parents. Some people are unable to get a job, so they can't be a worker, can't be. But you're right. It's much less intuitive.
Does it extend? It extends to things like one with a house, so one who has shelter, yeah. To be one with, yeah. And to be one who is satiated in terms of food.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. Sorry. I missed the obvious things. So things like to be healthy. So if you go to Martha Nussbaum now, the first capability on her list is to be physically healthy. And so that is a capability some people have. It's a capability that some other people don't have, because if you're living in damp housing, doing difficult work, and you're undernourished and don't have good clothes, then you don't have a capability to be healthy. So you're right, to be satiated, to be sheltered. So those would all be examples. Thank you. Yeah. So the correlate word with capability is functioning. So a capability is generally, maybe always, a capability for a functioning of some sort. So you can have the capability to be healthy. That means you have everything you need to be healthy. But because you've just gone for a skiing holiday and you've broken your legs, you don't have the functioning of being healthy. Sen's example is, imagine a wealthy person who has decided to go on a fast for some reason. That person may be malnourished. They don't have the functioning, but they do have the capability. So a capability, a crude way of putting it, is a capability is an opportunity for a functioning. Whether you take that opportunity is up to you. So it brings freedom into it. Now, I don't know if we want to go into the complications here, but let me just expand on this comment about the difference between the capability and the capabilities.
Because I don't know how to refer to it. I do both, and in my notes, I don't know what I'm searching for. Am I searching for capabilities or capability? So you'd save me, probably a few hours just searching.
Yeah. Well, just like any part of philosophy, probably different people understand this in different ways. So I'm just going to tell you my way of understanding it. Okay. So when Sen introduces the idea of a capability, he talks about your capability set, and take a very simple case. The only capabilities we're interested in is a capability for shelter and the capability for nutrition. So suppose you're a homeless person, and someone has just given you some money, and you can either spend it on shelter for the night or food, but not both. So you can't both be nourished and have shelter. You can do one or the other. So your capability, so you have the capability for shelter and no food, or food and no shelter. That is your capability set that day. So you have these two alternative sets of functionings. You can have a set of functionings that has nutrition and no shelter, or the set of functionings that has shelter and no nutrition. And it's up to you which one you choose. Now, if we take a normal person in normal circumstances, we have choices we're making all the time between different functionings. So the person I talked about who had the skiing accident, they had a set of functionings that didn't include broken legs. They had an option set. They had many option sets in which they had full health. They just decided to take one. Preferable ones, yeah. But they took a choice that risked their health, and that's where they ended up. So their capability for Sen is all these possible different sets of functionings that they can face. So a capability is a set of sets of functionings on that view. It's hard to do this without a whiteboard.
Yeah. So a capability is a set. It's a set of functionings. Did you say?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not. So it's not the number of capabilities. I think about it in terms of just like number of options that I have access to. So
yeah. So do that. So first of all, it's the options you have, but each of those different options will be a set of functionings.
Yes.
So
things that have been realized to enable when you make your choice, you are selecting a set of functionings that are necessary for that option to be realized.
Great. So if we go back to the homeless person, the way I set it up, they have two options. One option is to take the bed, the other option is to take the food. So those options present them with different functioning sets.
Yeah.
And so that's the simplest example I can imagine. Most of us are faced with enormously indefinite branching options. But so that's our capability, is to decide which of those options we take, and those options will present us with different capability sets. So, different functioning sets. Okay, so that's Sen's view, my reading of Sen's view. Martha Nussbaum's view is much more straightforward. So for Nussbaum, it seems that there's a type of 1-1 match between each capability and each functioning. So she will say, she'll ask, do you have a capability for bodily health? And that means, can you achieve the functioning of bodily health? And do you have a capability for play? That's another one of the capabilities on her list. And can you achieve the functioning of play? And of course, there are going to be some people who can't achieve the functioning of play because they have to work all day, every day. So young children in the developing world, mothers with heavy domestic responsibilities in a job, maybe they lack the capability for play, but meaning they can't achieve the functioning for play. So the way I read it, for Sen, capability is all of these. Capability is the big picture. This is your capability. Your capability is these options of functioning sets. For Martha Nussbaum, the capability matches off against the functionings one by one. And so we talk about do you have the functioning? Do you have the capability for religious freedom? Can you achieve the functioning of religious worship?
Okay. Okay, well, yeah. And the term capability and T's, is that?
Well, so the term capabilities
Yes.
comes from, so Martha Nussbaum very famously set out a list of 10 capabilities. So these, and I'm not going to be able to remember them all, but they begin with bodily health, security, affiliation, control over your environment, play, practical reason. So she lists out these 10 capabilities, and her view is a good life achieves a sort of high threshold level on each of these 10. And when you ask her what to do in terms, if you can't achieve all 10, she says, well, that's a situation of injustice. If someone can't achieve all 10, then the world is unjust and we ought to rearrange the world so they can. Whereas the economists, so Sen is an economist as well, economists are always interested in trade-offs, even when there's injustice involved, because if you're the policymaker and you're faced with having to decide whether to give people more food or more shelter, you can't just say, well, this is an injustice, so I'm not saying anything. Whereas that seems to be Nussbaum's view. Maybe I'm being unfair to her, but I don't know anything in her work where she has tried to deal with the trade-offs between different capabilities if they can't all be achieved because of lack of resources. Whereas Sen,
we can't just leave it to the individual, because a lot of these things need to be provided by the state. It's not just a matter of the individual selecting or choosing these things, because all of these things are dependent upon the state. Yeah.
So a lot of them do need resources. We don't identify them with resources, but they need resources. And if you have, you've made the point. So we're dependent on the state to help us achieve the capabilities. She says a just world will bring everyone up to a sufficient level. We can agree with that, but it doesn't tell us what to do if we find ourselves in an unjust world.
So I'm very partial to this approach. It just really resonates with me on an intuitive level. And it makes me think that one of the, and this harkens back to how we opened our discussion with what is the purpose of government. And if we accept that at least a part of it is the flourishing of the individual, that the constituents are living lives that they deem to be as good as can be. My question is, the way I think about it is everyone has a unique everyone is unique, and that which will cause one person to be happy may not do so for the other. So what we should do, and this is the general idea of liberalism or liberal societies, please correct me if I'm wrong though, that, by increasing the freedom of choice available to people, by increasing the capability set that they have, people can go and choose a path, a branching tree, a set of functionings that suits them best. And that if you were to kind of I'm just thinking about it as like a bar of, if you were to quantify it, like, if you were to quantify flourishing, that which promotes the greatest degree of what I think of as degrees of freedoms, or these functioning sets, these capability sets, will likely result in the state or the society that has the greatest amount of flourishing, right? It's like this optimization. I don't know if it's a good idea to think about these things in quantitative terms, but this is how I kind of think about it. Does that is there anything wrong there? Or maybe not really anything wrong, but.
So it's a tempting idea, definitely. And if you want to be liberal, then one of the impulses behind liberalism is not to try to impose your own judgments on the quality of different choices. And so then the thought would be to make people freer is just to give them more and more choices. But that has been questioned.
Also, what kind of choices, right? There's like choices between types of flavors of ketchup, or instruments to play, or roles that you can play in society. Like there are tiers, or I don't know how you describe them. But sorry for cutting you off.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right, and you bring to mind there were a few papers written in the 1970s by sort of lefty British political philosophers who'd just gone to New York for the first time, and they were taken by their wives to the lipstick counter in Macy's or wherever it was, and seeing 1,000 different shades of red lipstick, and thinking,
"This is much freedom."
There can be too much. There can certainly be too much choice, right?
Too much choice, yeah.
Yeah. So what we want to say is it's not the number. So Joseph Raz, for example, would say it's not the number of choices you have, it's or the number of options you have. It's the degree to which these are valuable. And so we don't necessarily increase people's freedom just by giving them more options of the same kind they've already got. But there, we begin to move into territory that makes liberals a bit nervous, because it means that someone is valuing these different options, and who has the right to say one thing is better than another. So Raz says, well, do you really believe that? Compare the life of a drug addict and a subsistence farmer. Which one of these is more valuable? Shortly after he said that, there was a massive crisis in farming, particularly in Wales, and subsistence farmers started killing themselves. So it's maybe not always so obvious.
When you're saying value, do you mean the value that the individual perceives of their own life, or the value to society? Not
the value to society, but you as an individual.
Which would you prefer to be?
Which would you prefer to be, or which do you admire more, for example? Mm-hmm. Because there's a sort of hyper-liberalism that says we can't make judgments. And Raz wanted to say to people, and he is right, the example might not be the best one, but Raz wants to say, you're fooling yourself because you're making judgments all the time. And there is pretty much a convergence on judgments, because we know what a good human beings are biological. We're animals. There's such a thing as a good human life and not such a good human life, and maybe it's quite hard to define that. But I think if we go back to what you were saying, the idea that what is the point of government is to give people flourishing lives. It's very hard to disagree with that, isn't it? This is what we want from our government.
At least, that's one of them. That's one of the things. That's a big one. And this is just on an aside, but I wish our politicians I wish someone would just ask them this, to the face, to Boris Johnson or, Donald Trump, what's the purpose of government? And, okay, well, if that's the case, then this, and this, I don't think it would actually work, particularly maybe not with Trump, but I just feel like this discussion of what is the purpose of, what the hell are we doing and why should be more central to our public discourse.
Yeah. Well, so I absolutely agree with that. That's how I make my living. So how could I not? How could I not agree? But it's tricky though, because if you have anyone who's very thoughtful, the politicians who are thoughtful, they will say something equivalent to this, even if they don't use the same words. But then you see the question for a policymaker is, so there are two questions. One is how do we make sense of this in practical terms? It's all very well saying we want everyone to have a flourishing life, but what can we do as a government?
We've got decisions to make. They've got big decisions to make, and like I don't envy these people. It must be difficult.
But it's not even that it's big difficulties. It's how do you translate this aspiration of giving everyone a flourishing life into specific policy objectives. And so you might say that actually this is what governments are doing, because they want full employment, they want everyone to have a home, they want to encourage, most governments want to encourage people to have strong family lives if they can, they want kids educated. So what they're trying to do is lay the foundations for people to have flourishing lives. There are questions about whether they've got it right, about whether these are the foundations for a flourishing life. There are questions about whether they've got the distribution between different people right. So are they neglecting some to advance others? Are they doing it in ways that are not appreciated, are counterproductive? But also they've got the problem. And so this is one of the things I think that my fellow political philosophers have not completely absorbed, which is when you're thinking about public policy, almost everything is a decision about making a change rather than bringing something out of nothing. So in other words, if we sat down and have a discussion about theory of justice, 2-week seminar, very intensive, we might get some agreement on what's the best theory of justice. The idea of then giving it to the government saying, look, this is the best theory of justice, do this. I'll say, well, this is ridiculous. How can I get there from here? I'd need 100 years and everyone's goodwill. I can't do it, right? So I can't just wave a magic wand and turn us from where we are there. We're in this situation. We've got this level of unemployment. We've got these problems about race relations. We've got this level of alcoholism. We've got this level of drug addiction. We've got these teenage pregnancies. We've got these people in prison. We've got all these people living lives that most people would not regard as flourishing lives, or many people would not regard as flourishing lives. What do we do about those? Those are our problems right now. Do we try to leave it to the free markets, deregulate and let free enterprise ride us to somewhere, or is that naive? Is that going to have the opposite effect? Do we have to have a big redistribution? Do we have to build new public institutions? What can I do? And also, this goes back to your point about big decisions. What can I do that's going to get me re-elected? As well, I'll get my party re-elected. Because if I'm pushing all the sacrifices on this generation for the sake of a better tomorrow, then that's not going to do me any good either.
Yeah, that incentive's not a very good one. I think it's the biggest one. At least it seems to be when you listen to some of the rhetoric. There's something I want to just go back to about the number of choices one has access to, and how more choices isn't necessarily better. But I think it depends on the quality of the options available, right? So different choices of lipstick may not be that beneficial, but potential professions may be, so if I have the opportunity of being a blacksmith or a farmer, that's not that great. But if I have the opportunity of all of those things, but also teacher, graphic designer, political philosopher, and, the capacity or the capability of being a parent, and all these other things which aren't as, I'd say, trivial as makeup or flavors of or condiments. I feel like that the quantity of choice for more valuable, I don't know what you would call them, capabilities, that seems to be relevant or worth worth exploring, because I think that I would rather be in a society where, let's say, I am genetically predisposed to just being the greatest sitar player of all time, or maybe an ancient instrument that exists today, but existed 500 years ago, but also exists today. Actually, no, a better example would be I have the capability of being the greatest virtual reality developer of all time. So this is this new technology which is only coming into the fore. But if I was born 500 years ago and I didn't have this genetic makeup, that I would never realize the life of being the world's greatest virtual reality developer, by virtue of the fact that I didn't grow up in a society that had that as an opportunity. So this idea of like increasing, like the more opportunities I have available to me, seems to be something that I intuitively think of as good, because we're all unique in our own ways, in our own ways, and having the potential to chart a course that suits me best seems to be like a good thing.
Okay, so I think I agree with you. I think it goes to the issue we were talking about earlier about the talents we have and the background we have, that as it turns out at the moment, if you're in the society we're living in, if you're 7'6" tall and very strong and athletic, you can earn you can earn an absolute fortune. If you were living 100 years ago, you might have been put in the circus as a freak. What counts as a talent very often is highly socially contingent. I mean, we can debate how much this is. So, if you have a very quick mind, for example, it may be that is going to be a universal talent, but it might be hard to think of societies where that's a problem. On the other hand, it might lead you into trouble if it leads you to criticize the authorities in a very repressive state. So it could be that your mind under those circumstances is a disadvantage rather than an advantage.
So in the capability literature, is it is this notion of just increasing the degrees of freedom made available to the individual, is that something that's a given, or I may be phrasing it the wrong way, but is this, I mean, obviously there are like base capabilities that need to be met, but once the basics have been covered, is just increasing the set of capabilities or potential functionings something to aspire towards?
Well, so the capabilities literature is vast now. I mean, there are probably tens of thousands of academic papers that have been written about the capability approach, because it's been used in all fields. It's used in health economics, it's used in law, anthropology, pretty much every journal. Someone discovers a capability approach and realizes this is the best way of conceptualizing something within their field, which it is, at a very general level. The problem is getting down to the specifics of it, and how do you implement it. And so this is why there's such a literature, because it's very, very appealing at a general level and seems right at a general level, but it's much harder to make it concrete. I think if you talk to, if you look at Sen's writings and people who follow Sen, Sen would say the capabilities we have is really sort of indefinite, that you can salami slice them. So you can talk about my capability to lift my teacup today, which is different from my capability to lift my teacup tomorrow, something.
It's like different levels of infinity, right? There's an infinite amount of numbers between 0 and 1, but 10's bigger than all of those.
Yeah. So if you just wanted to list all of the capabilities, just spend the rest of your life listing them if that's what you wanted to do. So for Sen, the important thing is to work out which are the ones that are politically important. So if we go back to that question, what is the aim of government? Which are the capabilities the government should be paying attention to? So I think, for example, governments have not paid enough attention to the capability of affiliation, which would be people being able to have a support network. And we're seeing this now in the COVID crisis, that there are people who are on their own, who don't have a support network, but we're also seeing these informal support networks growing up because people wanted to help their neighbors. I'm sure all over the world, if there's a old person living on their own, as my mother is, she was having to turn away favors because so many people wanted to do her shopping for her. So
that's good to know. That's lovely.
So you had people fighting over who was going to do the supermarket shop and being offended that someone else had done it. So you can get into that type of situation. But of course, this is an unusual. We're living through unusual times at the moment. But the question for political philosophy is, of the many capabilities, which are the ones that governments should be specially interested in and be worried about if people are not achieving? And this is really where Martha Nussbaum does better than Sen, because Sen just lists a few and then says it's for each country to work out which are the ones that they want. So he has a much more pluralistic view, and different countries can have different accounts. Whereas Nussbaum has tried to come up with a list of 10 universal capabilities, which will take different shapes in different countries, but she thinks, or different cultures, but she thinks all of them are relevant to all forms of human existence. I think she's probably right. It doesn't mean that she solved all the problems, I think, because a lot more interpretation is needed. I tried with my colleague, co-writer Avner de Shalit, we tried to do some empirical work talking to ordinary people about what they thought about the capabilities. And it was very useful, but half the interview was spent just trying to explain to people what capabilities are. So, we've had our discussion about it, and a lot of people did the interview without really knowing what they were being interviewed about. And so even though it's a good concept for theory, it's not a good concept for operational research. And if you talk about needs, for example, if you talk about people's basic needs, that's much better understood, and you can have a much better conversation.
I think it's just the terminology. It's just the words. Yeah. It's just they're more abstract. I think that's the only problem. Opportunities are very concrete, and taking and choosing something, it's concrete.
Yeah, but even need, you see, if you said, what do you need for a good life?
I need coffee.
Okay, so maybe that wasn't the right thing to say. But anyway,
I think that was the point. Yeah, I don't really need it, but God, sometimes it feels like it.
Yeah. Okay. So the question you asked me is, in the capability literature, are people saying the more capabilities, the more your freedom is? And I think, again, that goes back to a similar thing to the lipstick. So if the capabilities is to lift my teacup now and tomorrow and the day after and the day after and the day after, that doesn't compensate for not having religious freedom, for example. So we do want to give a weighting to the different capabilities. And this is one of the worries, I'm not saying it's a refutation, but one of the worries that people have had in the capability movement is the degree to which it's perfectionist in the sense of being non-liberal or paternalistic, because the capability approach is telling people what's good for them. And most of us don't like that very much, that we don't think it's for others to tell us what's good for us.
Yeah, I'd say that the good thing is a lot of them are based on basic biology, like affiliation, for instance. Like, we know that loneliness kills, and we know that, shelter and I mean, it is just like the normal human brain desires to be in a state of good health. Yeah. So I think the good thing is there are some, like, biology, the nature of reality grants us some constraints. So that is fortunate.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very perceptive comment, because one of the inspirations for Nussbaum, anyway, for the capability approach is Aristotle. And Aristotle also wanted to root the good for human beings in our biological nature. And so a lot of this idea of flourishing is, what is it to flourish as a human being? And if you take another animal, a dog, we know what it is for a dog to flourish or to look like it's flourishing. It has to have a shiny nose and a waggy tail or something and boundless energy. And that's a flourishing dog. So what's a flourishing human being? Well, it's not the wagging tail, but it's maybe being absorbed in their work, having good relations with others, having a good place to live, opportunities for play, and so on. And so we whether it's instinctive or learnt, I don't know, but we do have a capacity to be able to judge of other people whether they're living a good life or not. And so you can look at one of your friends who seems to be able to do everything. They're out, they publish their book, but they're on the golf course, and then they're going surfing, and then they're going to a family wedding or something. You think, well, it's exhausting. That's what a good human life looks like. Whereas you've got someone else who's obsessed with, putting their stationery in order or something, and spends all day tidying their bookshelves, all day, every day. And think, well, okay, maybe that's what they want, but as far as I'm concerned, that's not a good human life. That's an obsessive human life that's very narrow, say.
Yeah. One more question, which will take us away from the capability approach, but it's just one that I think is kind of more appropriate, or it's given the times, given the coronavirus and our freedoms being constrained, given the virus, are capabilities freedoms? Like, what's the relationship between freedom and the capability approach? Because freedoms is something that we deem to be incredibly important, but it's not obvious what it is. And lots of people have different definitions of it. And I'm just curious, because to me, like I see them as one and the same. I have freedom to act in a certain number of ways, and I have the capacity for me to choose. Choice is, I have the freedom to do so. Do you have any comments there?
So I think that's definitely a way of looking at it. And one of the advantages of the capability approach, as far as Sen is concerned, is an approach that emphasizes freedom, because the other approaches, resource-based and the happiness-based, don't have a direct place for freedom in them. So if we're judging someone's well-being by how much resources they have, we're just looking at their money in the bank, say, or if we're looking at their happiness, we're just seeing how happy they are. And whether they achieve that through their own freedom, whether they have freedom to do other things, is not part of the calculation. But of course, those are very simple views, and there are complex hybrid views that can bring freedom into welfare and freedom into resources. So there are lots of opportunities to put different bits of theories together to develop more sophisticated theories. But you see, the role of freedom is really interesting here, because I did have a debate with Martha Nussbaum about the capability for health. So if you think about, what is it we value about health? Do we value the freedom to be healthy or not to be healthy, depending on whether you choose to be? Now, that seems to me rather odd. It's health we value, not the freedom to be healthy or not to be healthy. Now, it might be we value the freedom of how to become healthy. So maybe you exercise and I don't, and I eat carefully and you don't, and we choose to be healthy in our different ways. That's right. So we need freedom about whether we choose to be healthy. But if we find someone has the freedom to be healthy, but chooses not to, we don't celebrate their freedom. What we do is think they are maybe depressed or something.
We put taxes on their cigarettes, it's like...
Well, yeah, but we don't say, good for you, you've just decided you're not going to be healthy. That was your choice, mate. We say...
Maybe not.
No, we failed. If people are making that choice, we failed as a society in some way, or something has failed. So what I would say, and I'm not sure what Nussbaum thinks about this, is that it's actually quite hard to generalize over the capabilities. The different capabilities are different. So when I give her this example, she gives me back religious freedom. We say, well, the point about religious freedom is to have the freedom whether or not to go to church. It's not to be forced to go to church. So it's not as if I have that freedom and I don't go to church, everyone should be saying, oh my God, he's not gone to church. What should we do about it? And I agree with that. So in the case of religious freedom, what matters is freedom to choose. In the case of health, what matters is not freedom to choose, but to be healthy. And so so I think one of the problems with the capability approach is that a lot of complexity is missed at the level of abstraction. that we talk about these capabilities as if they're all the same and they all have the same relation to freedom, but there's a lot of different things packed in. And when we start looking at it,
I see like a taxonomy of them in a way. Like the religious freedom, you have you have a choice to either go or not to go, whereas to church or whatever. But when it comes to health, being healthy grants you access to a set of capabilities that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. For instance, if I'm bedridden, I can't go and play football, or I can't do a whole slew of things. It's very easy to imagine what they are. So I feel like there's just, it does, I guess, probably this is in the literature, it's just expansive and I haven't really explored it too much, but this taxonomy of capabilities could probably help.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. So two things I'd say about that. So one thing you've pointed out, so being healthy is a functioning, but it's also a capability. So some functionings are also a capability for something else, which complicates the picture. But the book I wrote with Avner de Shalit, Disadvantage, where we talked about the capability and made use of the capability approach, we introduced a couple of things, and they're really just bits of terminology, but they're quite helpful for social policy. So we talked about what we called fertile functionings. So fertile functioning is if you have that functioning, it brings other things with it. And what you've just described, being healthy, obviously is a fertile functioning because it leads to good things. And we also had the concept of a corrosive disadvantage, which is if it goes badly for you, then it's likely to lead to other bad things. And they're not always a mirror image because, I could talk about this. There's a mistake people often make in social policy, which is they think if we know the cause of something, we know the cure for it, which as soon as you put it like that, it's obviously false because we know what causes lung cancer, but we don't know what the cure is for it. Smoking causes lung cancer. Stopping smoking doesn't take it away again. So what we say is, from the point of view of social policy, things like drug addiction are corrosive disadvantages, and your life will be wrecked if you're a drug addict. Curing someone of their addiction won't give them their life back again. It will help them definitely, but it won't put them back where they were before. So when you've got a corrosive disadvantage, when you know there are corrosive disadvantages, we have urgent policy reasons to prevent them, to stop them happening. If we found a fertile functioning, we've got urgent policy reasons to put our resources there because we get this sort of multiplier effect of other functionings as well. So this was our recommendation for the integration of political philosophy, social science, and policy. The social scientists should be telling us what these corrosive disadvantages and fertile functionings are, and policymakers should be putting in place policies to stop the formation of corrosive disadvantages and encourage the formation of fertile functionings. There we are. That's the policy formula in 1 minute.
Yeah, I see them as spirals. It's spirals of what's the term? Spirals of anyway. Doesn't matter. Virtuous. Yes, that's the one.
Virtuous spirals. Yeah,
that's the one. That's the one.
And then the others are vicious. You have vicious spirals going down and virtuous spirals going up.
There we go.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll leave the capability approach there. The coronavirus has presented us with quite interesting choices to make. All of them have trade-offs, and one of them is the economic impact of lockdowns. The state really coming down in some places with a strong hand and limiting people's freedoms in order to quell the virus. And as we've seen across the world, here in Australia, the US, all over the place, even people who were once cheering the healthcare personnel are now taken to the streets protesting masks and lockdowns and all that. So there's the topic of freedom is one that seems to be on everyone's lips when we can bear to talk about the coronavirus, because I think everyone's a little bit tired of it as well. So how can we view this question of freedom and what we are entitled to do, and when are our freedoms being impinged upon, and when are they not. I'm not asking for a particular answer of what is right and wrong, because I know there are varying perspectives on this, but perhaps you could shed light on some of them, and how, how could we, if we're having an argument with, your auntie at the dinner table saying, I'm not wearing my mask because these are my rights. I have, the right to do what I want. What could we say to that auntie or that friend who is, really steadfast in?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that there's anything you can say to an aunt to persuade them, but you can have a go. A couple of things that come to mind. So, if you travel in the Northeast United States, you see the license plates from New Hampshire, which has got the slogan "Live Free or Die." Okay, and so it's a bit alarming actually then to go into New Hampshire and see all these cars with a license plate that says "Live Free or Die" as a state slogan. And so I see something like that, I can't help but reflect on it, and it is an interesting question about how you balance life and liberty. And I think in normal circumstances, we're quite happy to give up small liberties for the sake of preserving life. So there are certain things like laws against pollution. I can't open a glue factory in the center of London, say, sending off toxic fumes that are going to poison the kids in the playground next door. So we accept limits on our liberty to preserve the lives of others. We also accept limits on our liberty to preserve the lives of ourselves. So pretty much every country has a limit to what you can buy in terms of the strength of alcoholic drinks, for example, that you can't buy. Well, these come and go in different countries, or poisons. So there's certain poisons, prescription drugs I can't buy without the doctor's permission. So is it a limit on my liberty that I can't just go out and buy a cancer drug without prescription? And maybe it is, but it's not a serious limitation on my liberty, and it's not one personally I would want to fight for. But there could be limitations on my liberty that I would want to fight for. So I'm fairly placid. I don't really fight about very much, but I can imagine circumstances in which, if I was part of a group that is being persecuted, and maybe people are being tortured and humiliated, maybe then I might risk my life for it. So the trade-offs between life and a simple notion of liberty are very common, and we're very prepared to give up liberty for the sake of other people's lives, and sometimes for the sake of our own lives. So wearing a helmet on a motorcycle, wearing a seatbelt. And okay, so why is wearing a mask any different to wearing a seatbelt or wearing a helmet on a motorcycle? So one thing is it's new, and people don't like it, and people don't like change. So this is just a...
and it's pretty in your face. Excuse the pun, but it's
just
like...
Yeah. It's not very nice, but I'm sure I've never ridden a motorcycle, but I'm sure people who wear a helmet don't like it very much, and would much rather not, or a bicycle helmet. So these in the seatbelt, or seatbelt is nothing anymore, but people were opposed to wearing seatbelts because they didn't want to be told what to do. So I think the mask protest seems to me to go along with a sort of conspiracy theory that the risks are being exaggerated. So I think that if you go to the mask protest, I mean, I saw one recently in London where someone was being interviewed, one of the mask protests, who was claiming that the care homes in the UK were like Nazi concentration camps where old people were being sent to be slaughtered. And so the reason why so many people are dying is that we are killing them, and that this has to be better known. So she was out protesting, thinking that, and so she was using the anti-mask protest to make this sort of conspiracy theory that all around the world, old people are being killed or something.
To spend one day on her Twitter feed, imagine what you'd see.
Yeah, exactly. So, and there are thousands, tens of thousands of people like that, and they gather here in Trafalgar Square for the protest. So, I think the general framework of the argument is that if there's sufficiently demonstrated risk to other people's life or your life, then there are good reasons, acceptable reasons for the government to impose quite strong restrictions on you. Now, then there are two types of opponents to that. One opponent says, I disagree with this conditional. That opponent says that, no, even if the risks are high, it should be my own choice. And the other person comes off as more reasonable, saying, yes, I agree, if the risks are high, the government should be able to do this, but I don't agree the risks are high. Right? So you've got this coalition between conspiracy theorists and a type of arch libertarian. And both of them are completely unreasonable positions, as far as I can tell. That the mask is not for your benefit, it's for other people's benefit. It's like the reason we ban smoking in restaurants. That's the equivalent. That's the moral equivalent to banning smoking in restaurants. There were a few people who smoked in restaurants, not very many. More people seem to be against the mask. But that's what it is. It's a small inconvenience for you to try to reduce the harm that you might be doing to other people. And the most important thing here is that liberalism doesn't say you can go and harm other people as you like. Liberalism says you can't harm other people. But of course, everything we do risks harm to other people. And so this then becomes a really difficult question of balance, because you say, well, what is the level of acceptable harm to others? We've accepted it with driving. So when I drive a car, I'm risking death to anyone who comes anywhere near me, because the tire could burst, I could lose concentration. So I'm putting other people's lives at peril. But the thought is that that's such a low risk, and driving is such a good convenience, that is a balance that we should take. So we set the risk trade-off in favor of the action. But notice, we make sure people have safety checks on their cars, we make sure they don't drive drunk. So we do everything to make the risk as low as possible, but we say it's an acceptable risk. In this case, what are we asking people to do? Not wear a mask. Wear a mask. Is it a big deal? For some people, it might be. If you've got breathing problems, okay, but then we let you off. We give you an exemption. But for the ordinary person, it's just a minor inconvenience, and it could be saving lives. So the risk benefit balance goes the other way, in my view. So I don't see this as a serious matter of freedom. If it turns out that wearing a mask is bad for you, so there's also people here who claim that wearing a mask reduces your oxygen intake and can damage your health. If that is true, then we've got another argument to have. If it really is true that we're euthanizing large numbers of old people in care homes, then we've got a lot to talk about, not just masks. But
for sure.
But it seems to me that it's a misuse of arguments to think that, given what we know, there's good reason against wearing masks. I mean, lockdown is interesting as well. You might think that lockdown has gone too far in some cases.
That's just for down here in Australia. Yeah, you may not be aware, but the state of Victoria, well, Melbourne has been on lockdown for a significant period of time, but they brought in curfews as well. So, a lot of people are, like, we understand the need for the lockdown, but why can't we go outside after 8 o'clock, for instance? Yeah. So like these sorts of questions are being brought up, and, they're saying I think there might have been the premier, he's like the guy in charge. I think his name's Dan. I might have seen a hashtag Dictator Dan or something. But they're talking about, authoritarianism, strong displays of control.
Yeah, well, that is a worry, and you want to see the evidence for it. So what's coming in here is, the pubs have been open, but you need to social distance and wipe everything down. but infections have been spiking. They've been doubling every 7 days now. And so last night, the government introduced a new measure to close pubs at 10 o'clock in the evening. So up to now, they've been able to open their normal hours, which in some cases is 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, even, as long as they're social distancing. And many pubs would normally open till 11 or 12, so they're losing the last hour or two of business. And for a lot of pubs, particularly at the weekend, that is where they are at their most busy. And just seeing on Twitter, people saying, well, does the government think that the virus goes home or only comes out after 10 o'clock? Or do they think you can't get infected before 10 o'clock? And of course, the government doesn't think that. But what they're thinking is there are a lot of different factors to balance. And we need business to keep going in a viable way if we can, because we're not just talking about profits, we're talking about people's jobs here. And maybe they can keep going, or many of them can keep going if we keep them open till 10. And people won't be so drunk.
They may just try to get more in their system before 10 o'clock. They may see it as a race.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, and we've got the universities coming back now, and students are now just this week and next week they're just starting university up and down the country. And so, as we know, what many students do in their first week is stay out as late as they can.
Right? That's what it's called in the UK?
Yeah. Fresher week. So fresher week, there are a lot of drunken students walking around town. But I think this is quite a sensible move, because it allows them to go out and have a couple of drinks and socialize, but without losing inhibition. And when you lose inhibition, social distancing goes.
A lot more goes than just social distancing, including memory.
Yeah. Well, that is so I'm told. Yeah. So I think the view we're taking is that if you have very punitive restrictions, maybe 90% of people will follow them, but 10% won't. And of those, some significant proportion will violate them in a very dangerous way. Because they might think once you've violated the rule, you may as well, if you're going to be hung for a lamb, be hung for a sheep. And so it's a very delicate balance to give people an area where they can be slightly irresponsible safely, rather than encouraging them to be grossly irresponsible and maybe doing a lot more harm. But it's an impossible situation.
Yeah. I know we're running, I wouldn't say short on time, but we'll be wrapping up soon. Is there anything that you think is incredibly important to talk about, or any message that you'd like to share, or if not that, is there anything that you're very excited about in the world? So very, very they're opposites, but I think both have something to do with strong opinion or passion.
Okay, so one thing I think has become very clear in the COVID crisis is that society is divided in many, many ways. There are all sorts of structural inequalities, and we notice them. We try to do something about them. We're not very effective, but policymakers do try to attend to injustice and disadvantage. In times of crisis, that becomes very hard. And natural divisions in society, not natural, but existing divisions in society become exaggerated. So, I'm sitting here doing my work today. It's not at all inconvenient to be talking into a camera and microphone rather than getting on a train to go somewhere and talk in person. Probably the lockdown has saved me money. So I'm in one of these privileged groups where I have my guaranteed income, lower spending, less inconvenience. Okay, there are a few things, but on the whole, for people like me, lockdown has been fine. And for people with their country houses, even better. And people with the country houses and cars, they're having a great time. Whereas people who are doing jobs that they have to do on the street, like delivery drivers, say that they're not being celebrated like health workers, grocery workers. There are lots of people who are putting themselves in danger. They were getting ill first, or people losing their jobs. So there are plenty of things where existing inequalities have become exaggerated. We're seeing this in many countries, that people from ethnic minority backgrounds are dying more, getting the virus more, older people are in greater trouble, poor people in greater trouble. So everything that's going wrong is getting worse. And because we're mostly interested in fighting the pandemic, it's harder to keep an eye on all of those issues. And I think at any time of crisis or change, everything's thrown up in the air and existing disadvantages get magnified. So I was thinking of that Silicon Valley phrase, move quickly and break things. Well, you move quickly, you don't break your own things, you break other people's things. And it's you break people's jobs, or you break people's livelihoods, or you ruin a housing market. You're disrupting people, and the people who don't have a safety net are going to be the ones that suffer most. So it just seems to me that we've lost a sense of this type of collective. Maybe we never had it, but we need to think much more about the collective sense of responsibility for everyone. And there was some hope early on in the pandemic that we had got this solidarity, but I think we're bored of solidarity and we've just gone back to business as normal. Well, let's just say there's going to be a lot of work for political philosophers of equality and inequality in the coming decade. So you asked me, what am I excited by? Well, that is an interesting question. So it's not excitement. Maybe it's the opposite of excitement, but I'll say something else, because my world is the world of universities and education. And I am amazed actually at how quickly we've taken to online education as a possibility. If we'd been asked to do this, we would have been told it would take 20 years, but we managed it over a weekend. I think it's just to switch from one mode to another. It's unbelievable. And what is fascinating, this is not really from a political philosophy point of view, but an educational point of view, is what happens next. So, if you have an optimistic scenario, we have a vaccine, it's very effective, and a combination of natural death of the vaccine, natural death of the virus and the vaccine, everything returns to normal in 6 months' time. And this was all a bad dream, and we can open the universities just as we had before. But suppose that either there isn't a vaccine, or there is one that's not as effective. We have the anti-maskers who don't take it and keep getting ill. It might not be 100% effective for everyone who takes it. So we can still, we have vaccines for measles. We still have measles around, and mumps and rubella. So just having a vaccine doesn't eliminate it. And it may be that the levels of infection are really too high to open the universities in the way we had them before. So what does that mean? It means that the traditional university campus is obsolete now, because the whole point of a university campus was to convene thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people together in a single space. But if we're not doing that, the campus is obsolete. And what would a online university world mean? So geographical distance no longer becomes relevant. Time zone to some degree does. Maybe regional, or it could go in the other direction, and regional proximity is more important, because if you're having all your classes over Zoom, you still want to be able to see some other people face to face. So I'm fascinated in what a semi-post-COVID world will look like for education, and whether this is the combination of the virus and online really is the end of the university, or whether this is just a blip and we're going to go back to how we were.
Yeah, I've seen that there's a lot of innovation and I would say exploration of what an online, well, how can online courses work and work well? Because I think we've all been there. We found an online course and we've sat through a few of the video lectures, and I think 98% of the people don't complete them for whatever reason. But I know there's a guy I interviewed probably a year ago now. His name's Tiago Forte, and he has this course called Building a Second Brain. And it's basically about how to get the most out of your digital technologies such that you can get everything that you really want to know, or that you've come across, all your notes and everything, and make it as accessible as possible. And I know that he's doing a lot with a few collaborators in kind of imagining how online courses can be done really, really well, and to make sure that people are highly engaged and get a lot of value out of them. And these people are charging, nothing like a university degree, but $1,000, $1,500 for a course. But there's online group sessions, and a whole array of things. And I've heard talk on Twitter of people trying to start like a humanities, like exploring what an online university would be like. And I personally don't, like, I'm studying at the moment, I'm doing honors in philosophy, and it's all remote, and I don't like it. I'm not as good of a student. There's nothing, I mean, philosophy is more so, this is more about philosophy than maybe the other disciplines, but there's nothing better than being in the same room and having a good discussion, We've been having a good chat, but I think if we were in the same room and if there was someone else who really disagreed with something that was said, I think it would be a lot more, engaging or exciting. So I think the digital realm lacks a lot that, being there in person can deliver. But at the same time, perhaps that's okay. If it makes university $30,000 cheaper, or if it increases access to by a tremendous amount, perhaps it's better. I don't know, but I personally think the in-person interaction is important.
Yeah. So I completely agree with you. So people still go to the theatre, even though you can see us in cinema. People go to see live bands, even though you've got the record at home. There's just something about being in physical presence of people that we haven't yet captured online, although it's better than 4 years ago. So things are getting better and better. So a couple of things. So one is, I suppose it's just not possible to go back to the old system. What's going to happen? And I did write about this, and I think what will happen is you'll have a segmentation of the market where the bulk will be delivered just as you say, where people are paying $1,000 for a course, and a degree is 12 courses, so you've paid $12,000 for your degree, and you've done it over 3 years, and that seems okay. There'll be other people who do things which are much cheaper than that, that maybe don't have the same level of interaction, but still give you a qualification. And then at the top end, you'll probably have small campuses that are isolated, where it's a social bubble, no one's allowed off campus, and the lecturers and like an old-fashioned Oxford college except it couldn't be in a city. It will have to be somewhere on a bit of farmland somewhere, like a American liberal arts college. And it'll be like a highly elite, very, very expensive experience.
Yeah, it makes me think that it depends on what you get on your resume, right? Because a lot of work has shown that the university, a lot of it is about the signaling benefits that you get. So if the signaling benefit was the same, if I went to the University of Oxford, and if there was all those three options looked the same in my resume, it wouldn't matter so much. But if I went to the elite, enclosed version that you described, perhaps I'd have something separate on my resume, which would then be all the more worth it, and people would recognize that. So that's an interesting question.
Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah, it is. So I hope we don't enter that world, and I hope the vaccine is 100% effective, or it all dies out tomorrow. So yes. So modest hopes. Yes.
Yeah. So if people want to find out, more about your work, if they want to find you online, where should people go? And if you were to, if people want to, yeah, we'll start with that first.
Okay, well, you see my name on the screen. It's Jonathan Wolff. So if you Google Jonathan Wolff, you may well get the guy who wrote the Seinfeld theme tune, who has the same name with the same spelling. But I'm quite easy to distinguish from him. So if you want to be sure, put Jonathan Wolff Philosophy or Jonathan Wolff Oxford, and that will come up with either my own homepage or the homepage for the Blavatnik School of Government with my webpage. And they both have the same information. They both have links to my work. So that's where you can look. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can try the same search on YouTube. There are a few other videos and things, interviews that are up, maybe half a dozen different topics, going back more than 10 years, I think. And you can find my books in some libraries and many bookshops as well. So.
Well, I'll link to all those and in the show notes. And if for those who would love to dive more into political philosophy, moral philosophy, or philosophy in general, but perhaps more of the political, more of in the political space, what would you recommend reading, or any advice for those aspiring to learn more in this area?
Okay, so I've written an introduction to political philosophy, which is called An Introduction to Political Philosophy. The third edition was published in 2016, I think it was. So that's available. I've also written an introduction to moral philosophy, again, just called An Introduction to Moral Philosophy. And the second edition is coming out any week now. So those are two books I would suggest. And those are things you can follow up from. If you want to look at the most influential works of political philosophy now, the most important book is John Rawls' A Theory of Justice, written in 1971. It's not a particularly easy read, but it is very rewarding. So that's where I would start. But if you're interested in following up on the capability approach, then look at the work of Martha Nussbaum. And she has a book, a shortish book called Creating Capabilities, which really covers a lot of the things that we discussed today. So that's a starting point. But her work, or the work of Amartya Sen, and actually covering some of the things we began with at the beginning, linking things together, Sen has written a brilliant little paperback book called Development as Freedom, which links a lot of the themes we've had. So I would really recommend that. That's one of my favorite books. So Amartya Sen, Development as Freedom.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'll link to all of those. Jonathan, really appreciate you taking the time. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Well, thanks so much, Sam, and thanks for setting it all up.